Welcome to the March webinar for the Frisch Center for Autism and Innovation. We are partnered this month with Mentra, the Neurodiversity recruitment platform, which is I'm really excited about. I'm your moderator today. So if you need anything, tech support or anything, feel free to shoot me a Q&A or a message. I'm Jhillika Kumar. I'm a doctoral candidate in astronomy at Vanderbilt University and the project coordinator for the Frisch Center for Autism and Innovation in the School of Engineering at Vanderbilt University. The first thing to say is this webinar will be recorded, but as a webinar, obviously none of our participants or attendees' faces or anything will be shown on the recording, but just to let you know, it will be available on the Frisch Center YouTube in hopefully a reasonable amount of time after the webinar's over, depending on how long it takes the cloud to download me the file. So our topic today is requesting accommodations and bringing your neurodiversity to work. We're going to open with a talk and then move into a panel discussion. Our talk today is from the wonderful Jhillika Kumar. She is the CEO and founder of Mentra. She is the sister of a non-speaking autistic individual, an AUADA, I can never do that, AUDHD self-advocate, a Forbes 30 under 30, which is the coolest thing ever, by the way, and has an honorary doctorate from Beacon College. Our panelists are Tim Vogus and Hari Srinivasan from Vanderbilt University and Tarena Shanaberger from Microsoft, as well as Jhillika. I'll give them a bit more of an intro after we have done our talk so that you guys get a little refresher. So yeah, we're going to start with Jhillika giving a talk, and what I would like to ask is that any questions get popped into the Q&A. I might choose, we don't have a lot of time today, and I know there's going to be a lot of questions, so I think what would be ideal is we save those questions for the panel. So any questions directed at Jhillika, absolutely great, put them in the Q&A, but I probably won't address them until during the panel, where I'll pull in Q&A questions as well as directed questions that we have already discussed. So without further ado and all that housekeeping, let's welcome Jhillika. Welcome to the Frisch Center space, and feel free to share and take it away.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Jess. Great to meet everyone. Thanks everyone for joining the panel. We are so excited to be sharing a bit about what we're doing at Mentra, and I will go ahead and share my screen. I think Jess might need a presentation access, but I can. Awesome. Thank you. So really quick overview of Mentra. Here we are. Okay, yeah, so great to meet everyone. I guess how Mentra was started, I can just give you quick context and background. Growing up, my brother Vikram is a non-speaking autistic individual, and he, at the age of 27, learned how, after I was doing research at the Georgia Institute of Technology, learned that there's this whole incredible field of work and study in allowing individuals to type letters on a letterboard and express themselves. So my brother shared his first words at the age of 27, and that was sort of a revelatory experience for me, for my family. And then kind of, wanted to really zoom in on how we can empower folks who are often over the age of, 18 and 22 to basically transition into employment services. Because when my brother started typing, he started writing incredible poetry and, has his own aspirations of being a writer and an author. And so my, question was, well, how can the workforce accommodate, someone who has, a lot of potential support needs in the work environment? And so that's kind of what got us started on Mentra's mission. And then soon in the journey, learned about my own neurodivergence as an ADHD, I also don't know how to say that well, Jess, and kind of got, really embedded in the community and understanding. So what we learned from a lot of our work and research is that 1 in every 7 individuals are neurodivergent, and that includes a wide array of, folks with autism, folks with ADHD, with dyslexia, learning differences, traumatic brain injury, who, have some form of cognitive variation, which is the product of natural variations, in the human brain. And that includes some of the world's, greatest innovators, leaders, writers, artists, of our day, people who've transformed the trajectory of humanity, are neurodivergent with various forms of thinking differently. And however, there's this 40% unemployment rate in the community, which is not due to a lack of aptitude or cognitive ability. We believe it's entirely due to a system, a process that is not designed for individuals who are neurodivergent, who think differently, and who have a wide array of strengths, as you can see, or as displayed on the screen, from accelerated problem solving to innovative approaches to challenges to specialist knowledge to detail orientation. These are just a few. There's so many strengths that neurodivergents provide in the workforce of the future. And, we've realized that in order to tap into those unique strengths of the population, it's not sort of an easy, it sometimes requires us to identify what are the success enablers that can allow the individual to really thrive and succeed and to feel accommodated and welcome in the environment. And oftentimes, there's these physical barriers that we see, across the ADA, supporting folks who, need wheelchair access to buildings, folks who might need assistive technology in order to do their jobs really well and succeed in their work environment. There's also challenges that might not be immediately visible to the eye, like learning barriers for folks who might have lower processing speeds or executive functioning limitations. And there's also sensory challenges that can lead to sensory overload. And so, we realized that especially when it comes to sensory overload, there's, what that happens, particularly when the brain is overwhelmed by, input of a variety of senses, whether that's auditory, visual, tactile, sound, taste, but also emotional, right? A sensory overload can be, an internal inability to basically cope with the environment and just the brain taking on more information than it can handle. And so that's where we believe accommodations play a huge part to really level the playing field and allow everyone to participate in the workforce. And so, there's a statement here that we believe in. I'm just going to read it out loud. It says, neurodivergence can thrive only when brought into the right environment where people are understanding of these differences. And I want to just underline right environment, because that's really, really important here. And then I also want to underline people who are understanding of these differences. And so when we look at accommodations, we've sort of split it up into, environmentally, that's physical accommodations. How can we support someone's, physical environment? And then from an understanding perspective, that's social. So how can we understand each other and provide each other with instructions, alternative interview formats, recorded meetings, questions in advance to really accommodate for someone's different, processing speed, for example. And so what we did is we basically grouped that into these overarching 8 factors that we believe sort of encompass the wide array of accommodations. And what's interesting is that 56% of accommodations are actually free for the employers. So it's not necessarily that they have to pay for support. It's more so that they have to change their behaviors and their attitudes in order to provide that support. So just to show you how this looks on the Mentra platform, here are those 8, holistic levels of accommodations that we consider when a neurodivergent job seeker is going through the platform and, entering in what they need. And how we distinguish this is, what do you absolutely need in order to be successful? It's a, deal breaker for you. You would not be able to do the job without this accommodation. And then the second factor is, what are nice to have accommodations that would be helpful for you, not necessarily required for you to do the job your best. So that's sort of how it works on the platform. And what's so interesting is this onboarding process we've had over 15,000 neurodivergents walk through that process today. And these are all members of the Mentra community. And we are seeing that these are the top 10 accommodations that neurodivergents have requested for most commonly. From noise canceling headphones, which can be really essential and critical in an environment that's unstable or unpredictable, to flexible scheduling for individuals who might have challenges and need that extra time to get the work complete. or even an interviewer experienced with neurodiversity, because there might be some unique factors about the individual that someone who doesn't understand neurodiversity might not immediately understand. And so, all of these factors, allowance of fidget devices, closed captioning, we've sort of realized have been, really useful, not just for neurodivergence on the platform, but for, we believe, companies and societies as a whole. So this image that we shared on social media actually got reposted 270 times because, or interacted with, because employers are sort of looking at, how can we provide these accommodations, and what are neurodivergents really asking for to help them thrive. So just in terms of how employers can do this on the other side, accommodations can be provided at every step in the process, and candidates are able to at any point ask for these accommodations. Now, we realize that is difficult. It's hard to come out and say, hey, I need this in order to succeed, because, what if the interviewer is not experienced with neurodiversity, and what if they might indeed discriminate against you? So that is where, education comes in, and that's where we're working with companies across the country to be able to support them in not having bias when they walk into, interviews, and making sure that they are truly neuro-inclusive. So just some examples from recruiting to actually communicating with the candidate, to actually interviewing the individual, to onboarding, and then from day to day, accommodations can be provided at every single, part in the process, with clear job descriptions, and all the way to, uninterrupted work time, fidget devices, etc. So I guess you might be wondering, for those of you who signed up not through the Mentra link, but through the Vanderbilt first link, what Mentra is. And if so, I'll just do a really quick overview, because there's sort of 3 pillars to what we've built. The first one is that we match neurodivergence with career opportunities. So we have this 15-minute process where we collect this unique data, often not collected on a LinkedIn or an Indeed, because we go a lot deeper into understanding the neurodivergent job seeker. We've had several candidates who walk through this process and said that it brought them to tears, because, for the first time, they felt seen, they felt heard, they felt like they could actually get what they needed in a work environment in order to succeed. So that's the first piece. The second piece is the employer experience. So we're able to, connect with employers who are, on their journey towards neuro inclusion, and we're able to centralize all those companies onto a single place and provide that support for employers. So companies are looking for, how do we find the world's most innovative and motivated thinkers? How can we hire them into our firms? And we're actually helping those companies with education, with the sourcing of talent, and figuring out how can we tap into this talent pool and avoid the bias in the process. And then finally, the third piece, which we're so excited to, we haven't launched this yet, but we have over 180 partners that have signed up. And these are service providers, these are job coaches. This is a whole support network for neurodivergence. And in the next few months, we're actually launching the partner portal to our candidates. So job seekers who need upskilling or support or job coaching can basically connect with a partner in their local area to be able to get that support. So we're, it's coming soon. Now we're focused on matching candidates with jobs, but very soon we hope to match job seekers with partners as well to get support and one-on-one coaching. So really, really excited about what the future holds. Thanks so much for everyone who's joined us. And this little robot on the bottom left corner of my screen is actually Neuro. We're building a virtual job coach to support neurodivergence, sort of walk through the process. And I think these conversations are so important to bringing awareness, and really, really excited about what the speakers are going to share here today at our panel. And part of doing that is having these conversations is a big part of how we can get closer to an inclusive world where we don't have to worry about, do we share our accommodations? Do we not? We don't have to go out of our way to do it. It's just inbuilt into the job finding process. So great to meet everyone. And I will pass it back to you, Jess, and excited for the conversation with our panelists.
Thank you so much, Jhillika. And Neuro, oh my, he is so adorable.
Yeah, thank you.
I love it. I love it so much. Okay, awesome. Awesome. So we can start our panel discussion. We have the questions coming in for the Q&A, but I also have some questions that I think we can open to discussion. So I'll start with some of those. And if you guys can all see the Q&A, if you see any on that list that you think you'd be able to answer within the Q&A while we're talking, feel free to do that, like within the actual box. And we can kind of move through that way. So I'll do a quick introduction for our panelists because I didn't do that before. Jhillika, we already know about you now. So we have Hari today. He is a PhD in neuroscience student at Vanderbilt University and alum of UC Berkeley. He is also a PD Paul and Daisy Soros Fellow, which every time I read that, I remember how amazing it is because I applied for that a bunch and never got it. That's an incredible achievement. He is also an autistic self-advocate and is here to talk from that perspective today. We have Tim Vogus, Vanderbilt University. He is the Brownlee O'Curry Jr. Professor of Management, the Faculty Director of the Leadership Development Program, and the Deputy Director of the Frisch Center for Autism and Innovation. He serves as an Associate Editor for Healthcare Management Review and on the editorial board of the Journal of Service Management. That is a mouthful. Welcome, Tim. He is here to talk to us from the educator perspective. And then we have Tarena Shanaberger. She works as an inclusive hiring program manager at the Microsoft Accessibility team. She's responsible for planning, organizing, scaling, and executing the Neurodiversity hiring program and other disability hiring initiatives. So she can speak to us from the employer perspective. Welcome, Tarena. Is there anything I've missed? Do you guys want to add anything? Please feel free to give me more credentials that I've missed there based on my Google search. No, we're all good. Okay. So let's kick it off. As I said, we do have coming in, so we can answer those and ask those as we go along. Let's start with let's talk a bit about employers, as we've just heard from Jhillika and the wonderful Mentra team. When an employee comes to you to ask for accommodations, what do you think are the best practices for ensuring that your company provides them?
Yeah, thank you, Jess. Hi, everyone. I'm Tarena. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, I'll go ahead and take this question and everyone else feel free to add on as well. So at Microsoft, I work really closely with candidates requesting accommodations as well as employees at the company requesting workplace accommodations. So similar to the slide that Jhillika shared and all the points in time that accommodations can be requested, I am able to see through the lens of the employee, the candidate, as well as the business functions that have to operate smoothly in order to make that accommodation happen. And so I would say that there's three really critical pieces of the accommodations process. The first one being that you need to have your accommodations process, whether it's interview accommodations, workplace accommodations, accommodations during onboarding, at any stage, they need to be easy to find. So it needs to be discoverable. If a candidate is going to your career site, they need to easily, within 1 or 2 clicks, be able to know how they would request an accommodation during the interview stage. They also need to know transparently what the steps are, what process do you go through. So as a workplace accommodation, employees at Microsoft, how do they request accommodations and what is the process happening on the back end to make those accommodations happen? Who has access to that information? As an employee, I want to know, is it going to be on my record if I'm requesting an accommodation? Is my manager going to be told if I request an accommodation? So my first answer to that question would be ensuring the process is transparent and discoverable so that the employee or the candidate requesting accommodations feels really confident in doing so and knows what they can request and how to do it. And secondly, I would say, if possible, offer accommodations out of a global centralized fund. So you remove that barrier of having to go to your manager having the accommodation, if there is a cost tied to it coming out of their budget, if you're able to offer accommodations out of one central globalized budget across the company for every employee or every candidate coming through, and you facilitate those accommodations through specialists, you remove the manager from the mix, and you have a specialist who is able to facilitate that interactive experience with the candidate or the employee, make sure that they know what will help them be successful in the process. Because many times it's unknown. I even saw one comment in the chat, I'm not sure what I can request. So having a team trained that can help walk through the process with an employee or a candidate to facilitate the accommodation request. And then finally, overarching all of this is just to really make it a part of your culture. Make it so that your employees feel comfortable, so they feel safe, so that they then in turn, what that does is it shifts the culture of your organization. Candidates then have the opportunity to feel more like they're not going to run into any bias when they're interviewing at your company. So really, the umbrella over all of it is that culture shift that needs to happen from the employer side to create that inclusive culture and that psychological safety for everyone.
I just want
Thank
to
you,
add.
Tarena.
I just wanted to add one quick thing to what Tarena's saying, because I agree with all of it. I thought it was really expertly stated. One thing I think that can be really powerful too, in addition to that, is having, giving stories of people who have requested accommodations and what they've received. And so people feel like it's a legitimate thing to do inside this organization, where it can be not just the kind of infrastructure and resources and making things available through that way, but also giving examples so people can feel like there are real people who are asking for it. Maybe they can reach out to those folks to get advice, but also to know that it's real and tangible, and it kind of conveys the range of possibilities for accommodation too.
Totally. Yeah, I 100% agree with that. And I think one thing that we've tried to do more of is, ideally, when folks are submitting their resume, all the way in the very beginning, and this is not something we can do today because the world definitely has to sort of change to get to this point. But for companies that are already neuro-inclusive, when they look at someone's resume and seeing, okay, well, here's all the, background, their strengths, but then, okay, there's a link that says, hey, if you want to look at my inclusion essentials, click here. And then when an employer clicks there, they go on to, a candidate's profile, specifically their Mentra profile, or what we call the next gen resume, which actually shows what are the accommodations that include that individual needs, or the success enablers they need in order to succeed in the job. That is something we're trying to really, start this movement around is, hey, when you're submitting your resume, if you can share that you have these inclusion essentials or success enablers, then employers will upfront understand, and you don't have to necessarily disclose, in the very beginning and have a fragmented process, which is different in every company, of requesting accommodations for the interview. So we're really trying to put accommodations front and center, even as early as submitting resume or submitting your profile, and working with companies to say, well, this is what ideally you should provide to all of your candidates when they are interviewing in the process. So yeah, having it upfront is something that we're trying to push for, and it is going to take time and employers to really understand and empathize.
Thank you. So keeping on the employer question area just for a second, and because Jhillika, you were just saying about having accommodations front and center, and obviously when you go through Mentra, you are kind of almost disclosing in a way by being a job seeker through Mentra. There's a question in the chat here that says, how early in the interview process do you recommend I share my ADHD or autism diagnosis? And when I do, should I have ideas on accommodations, though I'm not clear on what those are? So if anyone has any thoughts on how that is best approached.
I can kick off again, and then I did see that question, and I started to kind of jot down some of those accommodations that we see happen more commonly. But to address the first part of the question, which is how early on, I would say that really each individual and their comfort level with sharing, whether they're disclosing or they're requesting an accommodation, is something that is a journey. The more you hear of others and the more you share stories with others, I think the easier that journey becomes. So, you know, being active in communities like Mentra, that's going to help with that self-advocacy piece and finding the right employers that are wanting to support every candidate coming through the process and what makes them be successful, are just, there's so many various aspects of it. So it's not a one size fits all answer, but if you're applying to companies that have a neuro-inclusive culture, then you will you know, be experiencing an accommodated interview approach, interviewers and recruiting team members who are trained up and supportive of creating that neuro-inclusive environment. So if you do see accommodations that are helpful in the interview that you want to ask for, you also don't have to disclose that you have ADHD or you're autistic. It can be simple adjustments like scheduling changes. A few of those we see really often that happen are extra time for interviews, especially technical interviews, longer breaks between interviews, less interviews in a day, asking for your interviews to occur at a specific time of day where you're at your best and that you feel confident and self-assured that you can perform best at. If you're a morning person, or if mornings are really tough, then requesting afternoon interviews, most definitely scheduling accommodations. So working with your recruiting partner to understand your interview loops, what that looks like, and thinking about, am I going to be successful if I have 5 one-hour interviews back to back to back? Probably not. Most of us wouldn't be. And so requesting those accommodations that don't require disclosure, or they maybe you do. Maybe you would like for your interviewers to be trained on neurodiversity. As part of our program, our neurodiversity hiring program at Microsoft, we get a lot of candidates outside of our program that come to our team and say, hey, I'd like for my interviewers to be trained on neurodiversity. So what that does is it gives us the option to get those interviewers ready to create a really inclusive culture, to ensure that they are ready to type questions into the chat as well as ask them verbally, to make sure that they're ready to have conversations around workplace accommodations with the candidate about what it's like to work at Microsoft, to make sure that they're ready to not jump ahead and interrupt if somebody needs a bit of additional time to process through their thoughts on how they want to respond to that question. So interviewer training and readiness is another accommodation that would require disclosure, because you do have to get your interviewers prepared in the best possible way. Other potential accommodations that we see come up often during the screening and interview stage would be extended time for any exams. So if it's a coding interview and it requires an exam to kind of go through that first screening stage, asking for that timer to be removed or extended, asking for a different way of completing an online technical screen, having demo sessions prior. So before jumping into an interview on a new platform, I mean, the team here knows I joined on Zoom and I was a little out of my comfort level because I'm used to working on Teams. So we want our candidates to be really comfortable with the technology before they join an interview. So you can ask for demos. You can ask for your recruiter to jump on a call and test out the technology you'll be using during interviews. And then I think, another one is definitely requesting individual one-on-one interviews if you do end up in a situation where you're scheduled for a panel interview. I think those are, I want to make sure I didn't miss any good ones. Live captions. Most of our technology has live captions embedded, but knowing how to turn them on based upon the technology that's used for the interviews can be really helpful as well. So hopefully that helps answer your question and gives some examples of some of the most common. Jhillika had an even longer list, I know, with lots of great examples, but those are some of them that we see pretty often.
Thank you so much, Tarena. That was a list and comprehensive, and I love it. So thinking about accommodations, I'm sorry to if anyone else wanted to go. There's a lot of questions, there's a lot going on, so I'm just trying to kind of move us forward. I know that there are some questions that I had written up, kind of facing towards the student experience, particularly that I know Hari could answer, but I think they also apply to employees just generally. So I'd like to ask one of those and then go back to the Q&A, because I know Hari has some thoughts on it. So what are the and obviously because Tarena's kind of mentioned some as well, but from a self-advocacy point of view, what are the most important accommodations to ask for during your time as a student or employee from your perspective, Hari?
First, a shout out in appreciation of the incredible hi everyone, and thank you, Jess. First, a shout out in appreciation of the incredible disability rights legend Jhillika Kumar, who passed away earlier this month. Folks like me would not be able to dream of higher education today if not for her path-breaking efforts. Without her, we would not be having these conversations today. And she still found the time to encourage and mentor upcoming students like me. So, thank you, Judy, my friend. We all miss you dearly. Now to the question at hand. I can only speak from a viewpoint of a student, though I have wondered how the employment space would look for someone like me. Coming back to education. Access to education is usually interpreted as testing accommodations and maybe a few classroom-based ones, and they tend to be the tangible variety, like extra testing time, or some software or note-taking. The advice I would give is that for tangible accommodations, look at the support needs, subject by subject, and semester by semester, environment by environment, and how to make that useful. For instance, note-taking has to add value beyond simply copying down what was on the slides, as everyone usually gets access to the slides. And what happens if the assigned student note-taker is ill? Is there a backup? Could you ask the class be held in a room that has course capture feature? That way everyone benefits and it will not seem like a handout that was given just to you. It is also important to remember context. For instance, noise-canceling headphones are not a solution across the board. Let me expand. I went to my first undergrad football game armed with noise-canceling headphones, only to find that noise-canceling amplifies sounds like the cannon shots that were fired each time my school scored a goal. I got the fright of my life that day and almost went into meltdown mode. Noise-canceling basically works on dampening low-frequency ambient noise and is not good for sudden loud noises. Honestly, I have been wary of noise-canceling headphones since that incident. On the subject of academic accommodations, they are a necessary first step, but far from sufficient, as college life exists outside the lecture hall or the exam room. The tangible academic accommodations is actually easier to negotiate than figuring out and navigating your intangible needs. And I have found this part often boils down to the support and empathy from the people around you, your peers and faculty. This is human accommodations. This is all the more important if you have more higher support needs. So, work on building up relationships with faculty and peers. It may not solve everything, but it can make a huge difference in your quality of life. And did you know that the Disability Office is legally not allowed to disclose your disability, so all the faculty know about you is that you are getting X and Y accommodations. So, for faculty and potential employers too, the autistic may look like a black box that is asking for too much privilege. Their perception of autism is probably influenced by the autistic they knew already from somewhere or seen in the media. That autistic may have been someone who did not need many of those accommodations, so they wonder why you do, or at the other end, when you have higher supports, the perception may think you are too disabled to be productive, not understanding that autism is heterogeneous. I'm not that familiar with the workplace, but in the case of faculty, I would advise students to reach out to them, go to as many office hours as you can, email them, let them see the human, individual side of you. Most educators do want to support you, if they even get a glimpse of how to help you. And this human face of accommodations can be pretty amazing to witness in action. For example, I had grand mal seizures the summer before I was going to take my second college English course with the same faculty and was going to drop the fall semester completely. On her own initiative, this faculty arranged for the tech department to set up Cisco WebEx on her laptop so that I could attend her otherwise in-person class remotely. This was before the pandemic made remote learning an easy thing to implement. I am very grateful though, as a break in education may have discouraged me from continuing college at all. I did turn up in person to her class 3 months later. Another example is a biology faculty who, again on her own initiative, organized the lab exam such that I did not have to walk from experiment station to station. Rather, she wheeled each station on a cart to where I was sitting. These minor tweaks in your environment don't make the paper list of academic accommodations, but what a difference it makes to your college success and experience. Essentially, I want to stress building those human accommodations as well, rather than just relying on a list of legally allowed testing accommodations.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Harry. You always give such impassioned answers, and I love them. I think you made some really good points there when you were talking about kind of the human aspect of it, and how some of your professors really came through for you before remote learning, which is as we've touched on webinars before, is something that really helps self-advocates if they need it. One of the questions in the chat kind of touched on this a bit, so I would just like to ask it if anyone has a view here, how you might have a view as well. The questioner asks, as some situations, internal or external, can affect any person, no matter if they're neurodivergent or not, emotionally, and sometimes it can affect their performance, can we ask for emotional support or coaching as an accommodation? I think that's a really interesting question. Has anyone got any thoughts on that?
I mean, in some of the research we've done, we know where job coaches have been present in interviews, and sometimes, if they've developed a quality relationship with the candidate, they can provide some of those kind of features. So requesting a job coach maybe to be present in an interview is a possibility sometimes. But I don't want to speak on behalf of all employers. I just know that sometimes occurs, and those folks can play that type of role. And I think some of the things that I think Jhillika and Tarena both mentioned about, breaks in interviews can sometimes play that role as well, as a potential kind of accommodation where you can engage in some kind of stepping away and maybe some emotion regulation. And at the First Center, some of the work that we're doing with developing a virtual AI-based interview system is about giving people practice to kind of navigate these situations in a lower stakes kind of practice type situation. So when they get into the real interview context, they're able to navigate this a little bit more effectively, because they're able to develop some strategies, see which questions, and in the course of an interview, which types of questions maybe generate an anxiety or stress-filled reaction, and are able to better navigate them as a result.
I can add a tiny bit more context around workplace job coaching and job coaching support for interview accommodations. So as part of our neurodiversity hiring program, we used to fly all candidates to campus. We had job coaches on site with us for a week during our cohort program, and our workplace job coaches were there to support candidates throughout the week, but also to be there before, during, after their interviews. What we found when we went to a more when we shifted everything to remote was that the job coaching support was really helpful before going into interviews, to work through some of that anxiety, to take some of the feedback they had received through our other preparation sessions during the week, and really plan out using different methods how they were going to go about answering different questions during the interview. So I think that job coaches before interviews can be extremely a really great support. I would request it as an accommodation. I know if that is not a super common request that we see come through, but if we were to have a candidate request an accommodation of a job coach, then we would work with our partner, who we use all of the time, and we would pair them up with the candidate to hold a session or two before their interviews. As for in the workplace, workplace job coaching is super common at Microsoft, not just for employees that come in through our programs, but for any employee across the company. We use it specifically during the onboarding stage to really build up those foundational skills. And then employees can choose to re-engage job coaches at different points in their career. We see it come up if they have transfers to new managers, if we go through a reorg, or those times when there's a lot of change happening. So it's a great support. I love that. I think Mentra, I don't know if you touched on this, Jhillika, but there's a component of that, I believe, coming into support virtually, maybe, or maybe that's more future state, but workplace job coaching and job coaching prior to interviews is a really valuable accommodation.
Definitely. Yeah, the virtual job coach concept is built on ChatGPT and OpenAI. So, a coach that understands your learning style, understands how you best, understand and communicate with others, and then provides you with support. But totally agree with everything, Tarena. And just some to add in that support ecosystem, other accommodations you can ask for that make up the support ecosystem include, aides, attendance, once you get to the job, it's also definitely, having an open conversation with your manager about, finding counseling, finding an employee resource group that supports neurodivergence, whether that's a disability-focused resource group or a neurodiversity-specific resource group, which can be, really, really helpful, especially seeking out those leaders in the organization who are neurodivergent, or self-advocates who are neurodivergent. And oftentimes the movement is grassroots. And then any support with therapy or self-advocacy at the job, we've seen has also been just a part of that list in terms of the ecosystem support you can ask for, especially once you get to the job. And then we're working on training, employers too, with how can employers allow for job coaches to, either be a part of the interview, or if not in the interview itself, help with communications, the back and forth of scheduling meetings for folks who might have challenges with executive functioning, or to be a part of the dialogue with the employer as well directly. So all big parts of that support ecosystem we're trying to foster.
Hey, Jess, can I add to, I wanted to add.
You may, go for it, Tim.
Add to some of that, but also to answer another question that was in the Q&A, which was about, if I think I'm distilling the essence of the question correctly, which is, Microsoft's a huge corporation. I work at a small company that has a very low number of employees, and they don't seem to be really doing these types of things, right? So how do I negotiate that in a much smaller, less resource-rich employer? And I think one thing that I would say in that case, but also I think it applies in a lot of these cases, and a lot of the questions are about how do I actually broach this conversation in a way? One thing that I've seen be effective by some autistic self-advocates, and also started to see in some of our research, is using things like, kind of a one-pager where you're setting expectations with your manager. Hey, here's me when I'm at my best, so I feel like I'll be able to give you my best work under these circumstances. Here's how I tend to communicate. Here might be some ways in which I need help, to kind of manage the daily tasks or whatever it might be, right? Kind of a structured form to walk through that. And then asking of the manager, what are your expectations as well? How can we have a discussion about what our preferences are, to take some of those things that might be tacit and that neurotypicals might think they signal just through their body language and facial expressions that people should be able to decode, when it's not at all obvious, and turns that tacit and tries to make it more explicit. What are the sets of expectations? What are, my preferences for communication, things like that, and making that a dialogue between manager and employee. So I think presenting something that's a little bit structured. I know Tim Goldstein, who's an awesome autistic self-advocate, has some forms, I think, on his website, and I'll pop it in the chat, where he has some one-pagers for how one might go about, broaching some of those conversations.
Thank you, Tim. I actually just looked at this question myself, and at the end of the question, it asks about service dogs.
Yeah.
I don't know. I actually have some expertise in this. I know I'm not sitting on a panel, but would anyone mind if I just quickly speak to this a little bit? Okay. So, to the attendee. So I have an emotional support dog. But she has been trained for service. It's kind of a long story, but anyway, so I have some expertise in this. There's a distinction in the ADA between a service dog and an emotional support dog. So a service dog is a dog that is trained to do a specific task that helps you in your day-to-day, right? So these are your diabetic smelling service dogs, the ones that can feel seizures coming, anxiety prevention. So that's what my dog does. She can do stomach massage to prevent anxiety attacks. And then you have emotional support animals. These are animals which are not trained to do a specific task, but provide companionship to the person. And both of these types of animals are, in my opinion, incredibly valuable to the person who is suffering. The law around this is that if you have a service dog, if that dog is trained to do a specific task, you cannot be discriminated against in the workplace. That dog is allowed with you in the workplace. That is an ADA requirement. If the dog is an emotional support dog, it is down to the employer. So I was very fortunate when my pup was young and was still being trained. She was classed as emotional support, and my employer allowed her in the office. But that is down to them. So it really depends on the category of the animal. Now, assuming that it is a service dog and that you are protected under the ADA, you actually do not have to provide any specific paperwork. They don't have to wear a specific vest or anything. And I will mention this now, there are a lot of predatory online websites which say we will register your dog, like we will give it these special documentations and things. It's not necessary. Certain things like airlines will require you to have a note, usually from your psychiatrist or doctor, especially if there's something to do with an invisible disability, and that's kind of a different story. But in terms of employers, you say, I have a service dog, they're not allowed to ask what that service dog does. They have to legally allow it. There was an employee where I worked who was allergic. This is an issue you're saying you're coming up with. And we just had to work around it. We had offices in different areas of the building. I didn't take my dog around it. I just was courteous about it because it is what it is. So, and that is obviously a hard conversation, a kind of separate conversation about like, how do you deal with accommodations when they might bump up against someone else's needs? But anyway, I'll stop talking because this is not my panel, but Harry has a thought, so I will hand it over to you, Harry. Hold on, let me spotlight you. There you go.
I'd like to speak to the larger issue here, so we understand the root of the problem in both education and employment. In my undergrad disability studies classes, we have discussed accommodations for physical disabilities. Putting aside the funding and money issues, my impression was there was a uniformity of application of what needed to be done. Needs were tangible, like ramps and other architectural changes were needed for wheelchair users. On the other hand, autism is this huge heterogeneous group with wide-ranging needs. A large group has advantages in its power to bring about societal level changes, but it's a huge disadvantage when it comes to individual level, as there is no uniformity of application to draw upon. So colleges, faculty, and even employers are, I think, struggling to understand what can be considered reasonable accommodation versus too much or too little for new autistic that comes along. Also, needs may clash. One autistic may like dim lighting and another bright lighting. What if one autistic is terrified of dogs while another needs an emotional support animal or a service animal? Whose needs will get priority, and who gets to decide this? At the college level, I think comes down to education of the Disability Access Office, the college faculty, and of peers. It's like a gentle bump reminding them that autism is this heterogeneous group, and the last autistic they met does not represent the spectrum. Everyone thinks they want to be fair, but fairness is thought of as treating everyone the same. Accommodations, on the other hand, boil down to the idea of equity of access. The late Judy Heumann explains this idea eloquently in her 2020 memoir. As she says, equity of access looks different for everyone. When this is not understood, we are thought of as complaining, when all we are asking for is the same rights as everyone else. And who can do this education? It's the current students in the university, the autism student orgs, etc. that can bring such visibility to needs at the college level and beyond in the employment space. This is where we make use of that large group advantage.
You.
Thank you, Harry. Yes, that definitely speaks a bit to what we were saying about that clash there. I have, oh, let me see how much time we have. Wow, guys, we've got so many questions and we just don't have time. I was thinking what I might do with, we'll work through what we can in the next few minutes, but the ones we can't reach, I have copied into a document. And if you guys would help me, we can fill those out and send those around in an email afterwards. So everyone who didn't get their questions answered today, we can still support you in sending some answers, hopefully. I see more questions about service dogs now. Maybe I should do a webinar on service dogs. A specific webinar on service dogs. Let me know if you're interested. I know that Harry actually had an answer to one more question I was going to ask, and we could do that quickly, and then I can move on a bit to talk about some of the more questions from the Q&A. So the question I had was, and we kind of spoke about disability services a bit, but is there a best practices for navigating disability services within institutions, but also this can, apply to the HR area of employment, because it can often, disability services specifically can often make it hard for neurodivergent people for many, many reasons surrounding diagnosis and letters necessary and things like that. So please let me know what you think about that. Harry says he's covered some of that, which he did obviously in his last answer, but has anyone got any thoughts on that in terms of like maybe inside the HR space, or Tim, maybe you could speak to disability services within the university?
Yeah, this might not be a direct enough answer to your question, Jess, but one thing I want to think about, because Hari did speak about a lot of that, and I would say, that most of what the university provides is just kind of, additional time, distraction-free environment, things like that. And you're right, that often relies on a kind of very medicalized approach to it. So one thing I've embraced in the past few years in my teaching, and I was very influenced by Amy Gaeta and Haley Moss, both who are autistic self-advocates. Amy's also an academic, is they both have taught college classes, and they have something in their syllabus called an access charter. And I've implemented that in my syllabus. And so what that does is it says, access is something that everybody gets, right? Like in my job as instructor of this course is to make it accessible to everybody. And some of that are the physical, what are the two types of it? Yeah, the physical accommodations, right? Like that Jhillika was talking about, and others are the kind of social ones. And then I just try to make it really clear about who can request access, right? Like that everybody can do it. And you don't need to have a documented accommodation request. And that how I do access in my class, I have some description in the syllabus about committed to providing access to learning opportunities, recognizing that we may engage or learn and participate in different ways. All students are encouraged to do whatever they need in the class environment where they can engage successfully. And that can be things as simple as like bringing food or drink, moving around, getting up to use the bathroom, using assistive technology, et cetera. And students who feel like they have needs, discuss their access needs around classroom physical environment and materials, or anything else they need, can just talk to me about it. And that we're trying to, so that's some of what Hari was talking about with the relational element, but me as faculty member signaling that, right? Like in signaling that that's a legitimate thing to do. That's something we do in our class. It's consistent with the mission of the class. And also just how I think, makes an educational environment more effective. Now I realize not every faculty member is going to do that proactively, but I think that's something that I've certainly tried to spread at the Owen School. And I've shared kind of this template for other faculty, and I know people are moving somewhat more in that direction as a result.
Thank you, Tim. Has anyone else got any thoughts of that? If not, we can go through more of the Q&A. Okay. So has anyone, any of you guys who I can see furiously typing answers in the Q&A, has anyone got any questions that you saw that was particularly jumped out at you? If not, I can definitely pull some.
Yeah, I just saw two questions in there from university faculty members at Westchester University and Clemson. And I just typed in those answers around how universities can get that support to with their neurodivergent job seekers and how they can match with neuro-inclusive employers. So share the link in the answers with the sign up link. And many schools already have accounts.
Awesome.
And still sign up.
Awesome. So I'm going to go back to the top because I'm scrolling up and down like mad. Okay, here's an interesting one, and I think you guys might have some thoughts. So someone has asked at the top of the Q&A, any advice for neurodivergent individuals dealing with embarrassing conditions like incontinence who are looking for remote work? Very specific question, but I think would be very helpful for a lot of people.
I can jump in. This is Tarena. Sorry, I've been also furiously typing responses in the chat. You know, I would search for remote opportunities. Most employers now will be posting the roles that they do have flexibility to either be hybrid or 100% remote or in person only. So, I mean, there's always going down the path of applying for roles that don't list if they're available for remote and requesting that as an accommodation. And if it can be facilitated, that is always a possibility. But I would start your search by really focusing in on just those roles that you could work remotely for. And when you go to, I mean, yes, I'm talking through the lens of a larger employer, but if you're looking at the larger employers, then when you set your job search, whether you're just looking one time or setting up a job alert to receive regular updates on open roles, then put that down as a requirement. I mean, I can definitely tell you that if I were to go look for another role right now, that would be a requirement of mine, that I have the ability to work hybrid or 100% remote. So I would say that just really starting with that search. And then, you know, if it's a current role that you're looking for flexibility to work from home, that would probably need to go through an accommodations process. So again, going back to working with your accommodations team. And one thing I will highlight, and I put it in the chat now to respond to 2 questions, is the resource of using Ask Jan. It is, so it's the Job Accommodation Network. It's askjan.org, and they have so much great accommodations information on there. They also, I believe, provide some consultation, but there's articles, there's lists from A to Z of potential accommodations, and there is most likely links to the legal obligations of an employer. So there was one question about forget what it was, I've responded to so many in there, but you can kind of dig into, by at least in the US, can an employer legally require medical documentation and things like that. So askjan.org.
Thanks, Tarena. Has anyone else got any thoughts on those kinds of things, looking for remote work, how to think about embarrassing conditions, things like that? If not, we will keep going. Oh my word,
if somebody, so one thing I want to say about the remote work, embarrassing conditions. So if that's happening in a classroom environment, I would say any instructor, you just talk to them about, say, hey, I might have to be remote. We're all more used to doing those kind of things, especially for a medical necessity like that. I mean, I would think most faculty would be willing to work out some kind of arrangement if there are just days that you're not going to be there, be able to be there in person, where, you know, but you can still get the essence of the course. You know, for students who might be in that situation, I would say should be, you know, without even filing a formal accommodation, that should be something that's able to be worked out.
Yes, thanks, Tim. Absolutely. Okay, so we're actually running out of time. We have 1 whole minute. And there's still so many questions. So as I said, I've put these in a document and I'll circulate them to the panelists. And if would you guys be happy to help me fill the answers for the rest of these, and then we can put them into a nice email to our attendees. I would just really like to thank all of you today. Clearly, there's a lot of questions and a lot of need to understand how accommodations are used and supported and asked for and all those kinds of things. So has anyone got anything they would like to close out with? You're all just happy, smiling
Yeah,
faces.
well,
which I love.
thanks for so many people attending today. This is great. This is a really great turnout.
Absolutely.
Lots of excellent questions, which just shows the importance of the topic. And I was honored to be on the panel with such
really
great panelists.
Always good panelists here.
This is Tarena. I second that. Thank you for inviting us to be a part of this. We love Mentra. They're amazing partners with Microsoft. And just remember that it is a journey, and employers, have, it's going to take time, as Jhillika mentioned at the beginning. And so learning what you can do to self-advocate for yourself, employers learning what they can do to be more inclusive. It will take time, but we'll get there, hopefully.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And conversations like this are going to push us even faster in that direction. And I know Jess shared that the video is coming out on YouTube. So for folks who couldn't attend, or if you want to share this with your friends and family, it will be on Vanderbilt's YouTube channel.
Yes, it will be on Vanderbilt's YouTube channel, and I'll also I'll form these questions into some sort of format to add to a document to it. I will send that link out to all attendees, and also on our website when it's done, which will hopefully be by the end of the day, at least the video. I don't know if you can answer all these questions by the end of the day. But thank you guys again. Thank you so much. And hopefully let's do more Frist Mentra webinars. Clearly we're a good team, webinar team.
Indeed. And accommodations for for support animals is a great topic.
Support animal accommodations is going to have to be one of our next ones, isn't it? Because evidently people are not allowed to take their dogs to work. I think everyone should be allowed to take their dogs to work, even service dogs, right? There's dogs everywhere all the time.
Right. Have a great day.
Thank you so much.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Goodbye.
Bye.